In the beginning, man resorted to shouting to make himself heard beyond his immediate surroundings.
Is that okay at the back?
Then, as now, the human voice could only carry so far. Later, when people learned to master fire, they used signal fires, placing them on hilltops or other clearly visible landmarks. In ancient China, signal fires were used to quickly warn the forces when the Great War was being attacked. In the 18th century, the optical telegraph made it possible to send coded messages. The average distance between the telegraph stations was around 10 kilometers, but could be up to 3 times that across waters. Samuel Morse was originally an American artist who was to become famous for his electric alphabet. In 1835, he presented the world's first commercial telegraph. For this new device, he developed the Morse code, based on short and long signals. It survived by far the primitive equipment it was designed for, and is still used today, both commercially and by radio amateurs. At the end of the 19th century, Italian inventor Guglielmo Marconi invented wireless signaling. By 1901, he'd managed to transmit a Morse-coded wireless message across the Atlantic, from Poldhu in Cornwall, UK, to St. John's, Newfoundland, Canada. A real breakthrough in radio came in 1906, when Lee de Forest invented the triode, the first radio tube that could be used as an amplifier. This was the first step of modern electronics. At sea, the introduction of
just watch the deckhands on this.
Increasing number of vessels meant that safety increased. At the same time, a new message was learnt. 3 short signals, 3 long signals, and finally 3 short signals again. SOS. Save our souls. When the Titanic sank in 1912, it was the first naval disaster where wireless telegraphy and the SOS played an important role in saving lives. Although over 1,500 persons lost their lives, over 700 were saved by assisting vessels who picked up the Titanic's SOS signals over the radio. With the invention of radio came the first public radio stations. A wireless at home became the highest fashion. The family would sit together to hear news and entertainment. And right from the start, people were experimenting with radios in the car. They worked, but perhaps the antenna was a bit bulky. During the 2 world wars, the need for wireless communication, both for fighting forces and secret agents, led to the rapid development of smaller and more efficient equipment. In the early 1940s, we learnt a new word, walkie-talkie, the predecessor to the mobile phone. By the outbreak of the Second World War, radio positioning was well known to both the Germans and the Allies. In order to conceal their positions from German U-boats, Allied convoys maintained strict radio silence, using the optical telegraph instead. In the childhood of radio, the idea of building a mobile telephone was seen as more of a joke than a serious vision of the future.
Okay, I think we'll stop there. I won't push it down. Right. Gone the wrong way, sorry. How it all started. So Marconi, as it was mentioned there, there were lots of people working on radio. He was the guy who got to understand it and put it all together and made it actually work.
We're off the top now.
Right.
Well, actually, you could read the top.
That's all right.
Is that okay?
Lovely.
Right. So this was his transmitter. Why he chose... he had a factory in just outside Liverpool and one in London, and he didn't want to use those because he thought Ireland would get in the way and the land would get in the way. But why he chose the East Coast and not the West Coast, I'm not quite sure, but he did, and it went from Poldhu to u3a, and he formed the Marconi Wireless and Telegraph Signals Company. Wonderful patent number. Yeah. So that was 120, 122 years ago. I put this as a question. If anybody does know the answer, I'll be surprised. But the answer is, what happened was that 2MT went on the air February 1919. How often do you think it was broadcasting?
Once a day?
Once a day?
Once a week.
Thank you. Do you want to have a go for how long it was broadcasting?
10 minutes.
Just under. Yeah.
Half an hour.
Half an hour. But it's recognised as being the first proper broadcasting. And you have started to get famous people. But at this stage, there were not a lot of radios, and it was really confined to, in this country, in the London area. But it was going on across the world, America, Europe. Here's and that was there, and the woman would sing into that, because without that, you wouldn't hear her because of the noise from the instruments. Yeah, fascinating, quite fascinating. Right, let's come to the transmitter that changed the world. This is it. 11th of May, 1922, station 2LO starts broadcasting for 1 hour a day.
In 1922, a radio transmitter powers up ready to make history. Nearby sits Arthur Burrows, and with the words,
u3a, Marconi House, London, full.
Burrows announces the arrival of the BBC. The age of British broadcasting has truly begun. Wait a minute, how did this moment ever happen? To start a radio station, you need people to have radios. But who has a radio before there's a radio station? High above the mud of Flanders in 1918 float disembodied voices. The First World War is the crucible for a new technology, sending speech by radio. When the fighting is done, a small but loyal army of enthusiasts comes home. They're a new breed, radio hams, a kind of virtual community scattered across the country, in living rooms, garden sheds, anywhere they can get a signal with their homemade sets. Then the Marconi Company gets involved. At the heart of their team is the irrepressible Peter Eckersley. He soon tires of sending repetitive test signals to see how far they go and starts livening things up a bit, telling jokes, singing songs. The hams love it, but the post office, who control the airwaves, aren't amused by such frivolous content interfering with more serious uses. In 1920, they ban the station. After a barrage of complaints, the post office is forced to relent, but on one condition: radio needs to be regulated. They bring electrical firms together to create a new entity, the British Broadcasting Company. They alone are granted the right to broadcast radio to the masses.
They'll be powered by Britain's biggest transmitter yet, 2LO, an enormous jumble of valves and wires that takes up an entire room. And
That is in the Science Museum in London. If you have it there.
2LO comes to life. With 1.5 kilowatts of power, it can throw the voice of Arthur Burrows right across London. Soon, his voice is joined by others in a medley of news, weather, and even music. And it's not just hams tuning in. Young and old, male and female, rich and poor. Radios span the social spectrum, fast becoming must-have household goods. And so it is that the hobby of a few enthusiasts is standardised and nationalised. When the next World War comes around, it's announced to the nation on BBC Radio and heard by 9 million listeners. And that's how the information age came into the home.
So, just leave that. That was station 2LO, which in the BBC was known as a police caution, which was hello, hello. Yeah, okay. And the power that it had was less than a 2-bar electric fire that we have. So it would only do about 7 or 8 miles. So it was basically just in London at that stage. It became the British Broadcasting Company, not the corporation. And in 1927, it became as we know it now. Anybody remember these?
Up to a point.
Yeah? With your accumulator?
I made one. Didn't work.
Sorry?
I made one.
You made one?
It didn't work.
It didn't work, okay. It's catching, isn't it? Yeah. No, I'm much too young to remember those, yes. And then there were two significant events in 1923. Reith became the Director General. Very, very strange, well, to my mind, a very strange man. Very high church, Presbyterian, Scottish, very strict. Anybody broadcasting on the radio, if it was a man, had to wear a dinner jacket and bow tie. And if it was a lady, a woman, she had to be properly dressed. Couldn't be, no trousers in those days. And the other event that came on was the Radio Times was launched. And this was significant, which we'll come to in a minute. And he wanted the best of everything for all the homes. But what he meant by the best of everything was the best of everything that he approved. And his deputy, a lady whose name I've forgotten, they were always at loggerheads because she was much more relaxed and wanting to put entertainment into it. He just wanted to keep the thing regimented. And in a way, that has founded what the BBC is about today. So his legacy still exists in the BBC. Its first home was in the Institute of Electrical Engineers. And when as a kid, I used to hear them talking about broadcasting for Savoy Hill, London. I imagined this leafy forest on the edge of London. Well, of course, it's about a minute's walk from the Thames, Savoy Hill. Okay. There's the first wireless license. 50 pence. But within 7 years, half the population had a radio set, which is just phenomenal growth. So the BBC expanded it by putting in relay stations and transmitter stations all over the country so it could reach. And they didn't have listeners, they had listeners in. And at this point I was due to tell you a joke about nest of woodlice, but that's gone. So let's come to another quiz. What is she saying to him who stood fairly close to the radio? Speak up, yeah, okay. And it's the same thing with mobile phones. Do they give you brain tumours? I still see lots of people walking around shouting into their mobile phone at a distance. But and another one, which
Yes, we used to do that.
everybody used to stand, didn't they? Except in the cinema, you used to dash out before it came. Yes. Officially, the first outside broadcast was the lady playing the cello with the nightingale. And it's just been found that it wasn't true. The BBC faked it. There was somebody whistling. There wasn't a nightingale. Can't trust the BBC. You really can't. Yes. It moved into Portland Place, which is his home now. The Empire Service. That's a proper name for a radio station, isn't it? It became, and then children's radio came in the mid 30s, and a little bit of public relations exercise, handing the keys back. But in the context then of Radio Times, we had Monday night at 7, we became Tuesday night at 8, so why was that significant? Not the change, that wasn't significant. Okay. It was the first regularly timed broadcast. So before that, the BBC just put things on as they fancied. And so you had to buy the Radio Times if you wanted to know what was on. And in America, they'd gone to the business of regular slots at a regular time each day. And so that was really the first of those. And what the BBC then encountered was lots of competition from Europe. So you've got Luxembourg, Hilversum, that kind of thing. And it put pressure on the BBC to become commercial. Why is it that they can run radio stations, admittedly not offering the breadth of programmes that the BBC offered then? And one of the biggest thorns in the side of the BBC was not Luxembourg, it was Radio Normandy. You can guess why it ended then, but and this radio entrepreneur, Leonard Plugg, had an office in London, and if you were Henry Hall or somebody like that and you had a record, you could take the record to him and he would play it for a fee, which is where thing of song plugging came from. Yeah, I thought it was interesting as well. I didn't know that until I did this. Yeah. So what event saved the BBC from going commercial? Yeah, it was the war. And what the government realised was that it was a fantastic agency for getting messages across. What Reith insisted on was that they had to tell the truth, and his argument was, if you don't tell the truth when you want them to know what is true, they might not believe you because they'll quickly find out what isn't true. So there was a little bit of leeway went on, but basically the BBC told as it actually was. Right. Over to you.
The Archer.
Much more before it, Ma. Arthur Askey, Richard Murdoch.
For my time.
For your time. I'm surprised you don't know Bandwagon. The sitcom was that Murdoch and Askey had a flat on the top of Broadcasting House with a goat called Lewis, which gave milk, which was quite... And Mrs. Bagwash was their landlady, and their daughter was Norcia Bagwash. They don't make programmes like that anymore, do they? And I couldn't, and they did this thing called Chestnut Corner, which was telling old jokes. It was all part of the thing. Now, I couldn't actually find a video of them, so I got a video of them doing the same thing, but to the troops.
Jack Hilton and Gracie Fields. What a program! In case you didn't hear what I said, am I standing in a hole or are you on horseback? Listen, you silly little man. What's to do? Scotch. Oh, Scotch. I wasn't expecting to see you this evening. Why not? Well, this telegram you sent me says I am dying. I don't know what you mean. I am dying? Did I say that? I am dying. Oh, well, see, I wanted to say I am dying to see you, but too many words for sixpence, so I didn't. Well, if you're going back to old jokes you want, what about this? Ladies and gentlemen, once again, Bandwagon bravely represents Chestnut Corner. From China. What part of China? Hong Kong. Thanks, David Joe. Now, where are we? Would you like to see a photograph of me taken when I was in hospital? Down there. Here you are, I'm in the end bed. If the end bed's empty. Is it? I must have get out for a minute. Who was that lady I saw you with last night? That wasn't a lady, that was my nephew. He walks that way.
Quite a risque joke. And Broadcasting House was bombed. I gave this talk to Crediton last week, and I was talking to a lady afterwards, and she said I was a floor manager at the BBC for 25 years, and when this came up, she said I counted up, and that was my office. Yeah, wonderful. Yeah. Two significant events happened on, well, we'll give you one. So, okay, what was the BBC's response? The Archers. Grace Archer died. Yeah. And Crediton was a mine of information for me, because apparently the name of the horse that died in the stables was Midnight. So I'm told by the gentleman from Crediton. And it's interesting that this bit of sleight of hand has not really affected anything, except when the last programme of One Foot in the Grave was on BBC, ITV, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, at exactly the same time had their first £1 million winner. So clearly the thing is it's stuck. So 64, Carolina, and it, despite all its problems that it had and being banned, the BBC had to respond, and it did with radio, which we've still got. No, it's not proper, is it? Not like the Home and the Third and the Light. It's not proper radio stations in any way. Commercial radio is legalised, and so it's beginning to spread on both ways, both public service broadcasting and commercial. Radio Leicester, first BBC station. Sure. pluck a date out of the
72.
84.
84?
83.
That's not bad, 83. So, let's have a look at the BBC and television. When it started, there were two forms of the television service. One was a mechanical one, and one was an electronic-based one. And the BBC ran both of them for about 3 or 4 years, maybe even 5 years, until they decided which was the better version. So we'll just look at the basis of both of them. So in this country, Logie Baird and Jennings in the USA. Very similar systems, although it's argued that neither of them knew what the other one was doing, so they weren't pinching from one another. So let's have a look at...
It's 1923 in the seaside town of Hastings, England. Inventor John Logie Baird is hoping the fresh sea air will improve his chronic bad health. It better. Baird is a genius, but his health problems and his life of inventing have left him seriously broke.
My father came across as being rather withdrawn and not quite with it. You would say something to him and he wouldn't necessarily respond to it because he would be thinking of something else. But he was always polite.
But Baird has an idea that just might let him invent his way out of his predicament.
Here he was with £100 left and he had to think of something, and that was television.
What Baird is imagining is a huge technological leap. Transmitting sound over great distances by radio is still new. So transmitting moving pictures seems like science fiction. So how do you capture a moving image and transmit it through thin air? He sketches a device he hopes will work. He starts with a disc fitted with a spiral of perfectly spaced holes. Powered by an electric motor, the disc will spin in front of an image. As it spins, each hole in the spiral allows a tiny slice of the image to pass through. A light sensor picks up these little image slices and converts them into a series of electrical pulses. The pulses are transmitted by radio waves to a receiver that reads the signal of the pulses and reconstructs the original image on a second spinning disc. Baird sets up a simple cross in front of the scanning disc. He syncs up the receiving disc at the opposite side of the room and watches to see what his crazy contraption can do. As if by magic, it appears. As the receiving disc spins, it reassembles the shadowy shape of the cross. Baird is ecstatic. It proves his basic assumptions are correct.
You wouldn't think it was ecstatic, would you,
It's
from
still
that?
a long way off. It's October 1925. The day starts out like so many before it. For the umpteenth time, Baird places the head of a ventriloquist's dummy in front of the scanning disc. He floods the room with light as the scanning disc begins to spin. But this time, things will be different. Over in a separate screening room, there appears on the synchronized receiving disc, out of nowhere, the world's first ever detailed television image. He's finally got the magic combination. Baird knows at once it's a major breakthrough.
He could hardly believe his eyes, and it came as quite a shock when it eventually came.
Baird can't wait to do a test with a real human subject, the office boy from downstairs. 20-year-old William Tainton is terrified. He sits confused as Baird rushes back to the screening room. As the discs sync up, Baird instructs him to move his mouth.
William, stick out your tongue!
William Tainton, the first human face ever to be seen on TV. John Logie Baird and his miraculous new invention have arrived.
This first recorded image from Baird's TV only has 30 lines of resolution, compared to over 500 on standard TVs today. But the features are recognizable in shades of gray. Baird takes his television public. The first tiny screens are a sensation. Within 4 years, the BBC transmits its first official TV broadcast using Baird's mechanical system.
So, let's look at the electronic. This guy is absolutely remarkable. He lived in a Midwest farm. Where he got his electronic knowledge from, I have no idea.
All right, now may we have our next contestant, please?
In 1958, a mysterious guest on a TV quiz show had a startling secret. He was Philo T. Farnsworth, and he had invented the first electronic television system. He conceived the idea as a boy of 14 before leaving the family farm in Utah. By age 19, the self-taught young genius had convinced a group of San Francisco bankers to fund his project. By 1928, he was able to transmit a recognizable image. The 22-year-old inventor sent a telegram to his backers declaring, "The damn thing works." Farnsworth went on to found larger laboratories and a factory, but in the end he couldn't compete with the financial might and legal firepower of his giant arch rival, RCA. Kept busy defending his patents, Farnsworth could not maintain his early technological edge, and in the late 30s, RCA finally took the lead for good. Vladimir Zworykin, RCA's chief scientist, became known as the father of television. Though his company survived until 1949, Farnsworth's only lasting recognition came 10 years earlier, when RCA finally agreed to license certain of his patents. It was the first time RCA had ever agreed to license technology from outside the company.
Yeah, just incredibly talented man. So they would start on Monday. And they were running both systems. In the end, they went for the electronic system, which was easier to use. So now I'm going to, I don't think it was the actual first night, I think it was a mock-up of the first transmission. But we're all used to regional accents on the radio and television now. Just listen to the pronunciation in this.
Do we speak proper, like?
Yeah. Oh, read proper. Absolutely.
Here, stand by in the control room. The levels are set. Switches are thrown. Generators begin to turn. The water flows through to the transmitter valves. The valve filaments begin to glow. The lights in the studios come up on the dimmers. The producer is waiting at his microphone to speak his last word to the artist. The controllers are ready on vision and sound. The vision and sound are on. The station goes on the air.
Here we go.
To
Standards have definitely slipped. You probably won't know. And she wasn't a particularly famous star or anything. She was apparently just taken out of a West End musical that was going on. And she did that. Yeah, interesting. So what was the last show to appear on television in 1939? You won't get it. And we resumed again in 46. This is a typical broadcasting studio, 30 hours a week. So what's that, 4 hours a day? Well, probably not Sundays, they probably didn't broadcast on Sundays. And they had technical difficulties, which led to the, it's already been mentioned. And I remember another one of a boat, I think, going down the Thames. We'll stop there, he's making a pot. Well, you can watch it if you wish.
It's better than ours. The groves.
Fantastic. Fantastic. I was going to give you the clue, is I'm faint for lack of nourishment. Which is what, and just look at the girl that comes in from the left-hand side. She has, I think, a 12-inch waist. Come on, dear.
Hello, I've just put my bags on. Hello, I've just put my bags on the taxi. So, how are you today?
Morning, Dave. Well, then, just been led.
Oh,
All right, now we got it. Oh, hello, Jane. We better get the body into Glasgow, say goodbye.
I thought you look here.
Oh.
Gladys, I've had a sleepless night worrying about you. Oh, me? Yes. Without me being there, this won't be a holiday for you. It'll only be more work. So I'm coming with you to look after you. Now listen, for 50 out of 52 weeks you work and toil for me. Whatever I ask for, you get it for me. But the other 2 weeks are mine to try and repay you for all you've done. So Jones and me, they're coming with you to do all the work on the holiday.
Yeah, but where are you going to sleep, Dad?
Oh, Jones has got 2 camp beds with me. With us. But Granny can't even a camp bed. That is my mind is made up. I've argued with her for hours, but she seems determined. Besides, I don't see why she shouldn't be with you all on holiday.
All right, Gran, of course you can come, and I shall be delighted to paddle with you.
I shall not be a party with any disgusting habit of showing me ankles.
Oh, very nasty. How we going to do it?
I think it lacks a little bit in production value, doesn't it? Okay, so right, so we'll go on to the future. We're getting towards the end now. So I hadn't realised that iPlayer was quite so old. And BBC Sounds, I think it was called BBC Sounds iPlayer before it was rechristened BBC Sounds. And what this is doing now, it's reflecting the fact that certainly the younger generation do not watch or listen as we used to. They don't go and stay in for Hancock's half hour or whatever it was you wanted to listen to. They can catch it, they do it on catch up and they just go on. So So it's gradually moving away from regular slots to watch whenever you want to. This was published in 2016, and the BBC is constantly under pressure. One side saying it's too liberal, the other side saying it's too right-wing. You've always got the problem that somebody has to make a decision about what is shown, and that decision cannot be made in isolation. You just can't do it. And so what one person chooses, another person wouldn't. And in Buffy Tracy, we have a heritage centre where in the 80s, they did 60 hours of recording of Buffy residents talking about their life in the 1910s, 20s and 30s. Now each recording is 45 minutes and nobody wants to listen to 45 minutes. So I've gone through them and selected a couple of minutes from each of the recordings. If somebody else did it, they would probably take different ones because I'm looking for different things. So you can't get away from bias in some shape or form. We don't need to do that one. But finally, and this is my plea now, it's your BBC. And if you treasure it, you do need to protect it. Just make sure that it's looked after. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ian. Do we have any questions? I'm sure there must be some questions that you want to put to Ian. Oh, here.
In fairness, the interlude was also used to cover up short programmes that were shorter in duration.
Right.
And it was also to change the set because there was only one studio.
Yes. Yeah.
It wasn't just technical issues.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Because it was all live.
Yeah.
When I started playing for a rugby club in Salford, so it's 1960. It was still live television then, and we had an actor who played for us. And he was always the one on the BBC that walked across the back of the screen when he shouldn't have done because it was live television. We used to say Saturday afternoons, oh, we saw you on the telly. I know, I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have done that.
Yeah. Ian, how do you think the BBC is going to be financed in the future? I mean, there's always talk about scrapping the licence and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
Having a subscription service, I don't quite see it's going to work.
No, we are the only country that run a licence fee as this. In Europe, it's a tax on a house. So they assume the house will have a radio or a television, so they have a tax on a house. In America, it's all commercial. And if you've ever spent any time in America, you would thank your lucky stars for the BBC. Because American AM stations are dreadful, they really are. They're completely right-wing. There is a public service broadcasting stations in America, and they are funded by drives. They have drives to bring in money, and I listen to several of them. So it would be a brave politician in the next 20 or 30 years that tinkered with the BBC, because the people that listen to the BBC are our generation, and it's our generation that vote, and therefore I think for 20 or 30 years it's probably secure, but it will change. I don't think there's any doubt about that. It's an antiquated system. It's a question of what will it change. Channel 4, although it's commercial, it is a public service broadcaster. And it's there to do public service broadcasting. And you can see the furore that happened when they wanted to sell it off to pure commercial. It was not liked, and I just don't think it will happen with the BBC. They will come to some agreement that allows it. I saw a little snippet in the newspaper this morning that the government is thinking of changing the rules to allow BBC, ITV and Channel 4 to become more competitive within public service broadcasting rules. But about a third of the income, maybe even more, of the BBC comes from its sales abroad. It's not just from the licence fee. So it has a very strong commercial arm, selling programmes over, and particularly period dramas, which go down very well, or the format. I'm trying to think, it's gone, it'll come to me in a minute. But the one written by Johnny Spate, oh dear me.
Till Death Us Do
Till
Part.
Death Us Do Part. That was sold in, as the format. The Dad's Army format was sold, and apparently the role of Pike became Hetherington. And when they did the famous thing, "Don't Tell Him Pike," which brought the house down over here, "Don't Tell Him Hetherington," didn't have the same effect. So, but they pay for the format and then they just change it to whatever they want to do it. So yeah, it will change.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about it. Yeah.
Well,
When you watch the old news items, and also a lot of the speech on here in the past, why do the newsreaders sound like they do? They talk completely differently to the way newsreaders talk now. Were they taught to do that, or is it just the way...
It was received pronunciation. You did not get a job at the BBC.
It's just the way they approach.
Unless you spoke with received pronunciation. If you listen closely to Adele, it is television.
Yeah.
It's not television, it's television.
But it's a sort of more than that, isn't it? It's as though they're sort of celebrating something all the time. It's an authoritative voice.
Oh yes, yes, and the BBC was the authoritative voice of the UK. Yes, it is, and they were cloned. Well, not cloned, but they were brought in, and I can't remember. I think Annie Nightingale was the first real regional accent to come on, and that was on a music show.
Wasn't that Wilfred Pickles?
Well, Wilfred Pickles, I've forgotten that. Yes.
There didn't seem to be quite so much received pronunciation on the radio, because Wilfred Pickles was on the radio.
Yeah, that's yes, you're probably right thinking about it. Yes, and Itmar. So, but ASCII came from Liverpool.
Yes, yeah.
As did Handley. There was no trace of a Liverpool accent with them. They had to get rid of it to exist on the stage, and certainly to get onto the television. And that was really Reith's legacy, that it had to be proper, if that is the phrase. And it's relaxed, you know. I mean, sometimes when you get, and I'm not having a go at this, but you get a Scottish or an Irish broadcaster, and I can't actually understand what they say, because my ear is not tuned in to what they say. But equal opportunities now. Yeah.
do we have any more? Yes.
Is it right that the broadcasting house is supposedly built like a ship?
Yes, it's supposed to be shaped like, I've never seen it, but it's supposed to have a ship's prow at the front. And is it Ariel, the statue that's on the front of? Yeah, and it has a statue of Ariel on the front. Yes.
Yeah, Eric Gill.
I mean, why it was done that way?
Because of the land. Because of the shape of the land.
Oh right, it was a shape. It was just pragmatic, was it? Oh
It had to be
right,
a
okay.
fitting image, so that when you looked up Regent Street,
Yes.
it fitted with all the other buildings.
Right. I'm glad they came down here the last couple of weeks. I'm learning a lot. Yeah.
Interesting fact that at the beginning of the war, when the Luftwaffe started bombing London, they always seemed to turn up when the weather conditions were quite good.
Mm-hmm.
It was said that the German scientists would listen to the bombs of Big Ben which were broadcast on the hour live every hour.
Yes.
And by knowing the length of the sound and the timbre, they could work out how much water moisture there was in the air.
Right.
So they would use that to plan their bombing raids. And the Secret Service here worked out what they were doing. So then the BBC recorded the bombs, and they went out every hour. Confuse the Luftwaffe.
Yeah. And apparently a lot of Churchill's speeches weren't made by Churchill, they were made by an actor that did it. Yeah. Yeah, interesting.
How much do they actually still do at Broadcasting House? Because most of it's moved up to Salford, hasn't it now?
No, Broadcasting House is still...
It's still the main.
Yeah. Salford is not that's my hometown, and it's not a big operation.
Media City or something, isn't it called?
Media City, it is. Yeah. Which is right next to what used to be the Manchester Ship Canal docks, which has changed slightly from my days. It's the business of dispersing the BBC out into the regions, and the interesting thing is, of course, nobody who works in Media City lives in Salford. No. They all live in Cheshire. So they leave London on a deal which allows them to buy a big house in Cheshire, and it's okay. I doubt that it's
effective. Funded by our licence fees.
Pardon?
Funded by our licence fees.
Yes, exactly. Funded by your licence fee. Yeah. But it must have had some impact on Salford, because it must have created some employment, but it's minimal. It's not a major thing. It's replacing. Sorry, I'm going into nostalgia now, but the first factory that I worked in, and this may surprise you down here, we had 15,000 people working in one factory. And that was by no means the biggest factory. Metrovix had 32,000 people working in one factory. And Trafford Park Industrial Estate had 300,000 people working in manufacturing. Well, you can't replace that with Media City. But it's a start, and it brightens the town up and such like. Still a dreadful place, and that's my hometown. That's my hometown.
Go ahead, any more questions?
Ian, what are your thoughts on how the BBC use paying extortionate salaries to people such as Gary Lineker in excess of £1 million when basic state pensioners can't get a free licence?
The argument is not that we only see Lineker here, but Match of the Day is sold all over the world, and the argument is that Lineker is the key to that. I'm not sure I believe that argument, but I can see it in the sense that he was a very high-profile footballer, and the world knows him. It's like anything else. It's like footballers being paid £500,000 a week. If that's what you're going to pay, that's fine. It's difficult for the BBC because exactly of the point you make. Ant and Dec, I think, get £10,000 for every show they do, something like that. No, it's probably a lot more than that now, maybe 100,000. So, and once you've got an established personality, it's quite difficult to break away from that. There's some programmes I will not listen to because I do not like the presenter. But that's me. The fact is that most people do like the presenter. And it sells, anything with Brian Cox in goes off. Immediately. I cannot stand the man. Which is stupid because what he does is very good. but it's my personal preference. So I don't know what the answer is to the Lineker thing. Given that it's commercial, yeah, fine.
But it's not just Gary Lineker, he's got probably 4 puppets there as well, you know.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I'm sure
Yeah.
BBC waste money.
Yeah, but the argument being, BBC just move somewhere else and get equal.
Well, that's what happened to Clarkson, didn't it?
Add it to the list.
Right, if there's any more questions, you can come and chat to me whilst I'm packing up. And thanks very much for your enthusiasm.
I must officially thank